Hello, this is Greg Allison from Galactic Greg's coming to you from a location somewhere in Milky Way Galaxy. And we're going to talk about the new race to space. And we're going to ask you the question, who will be on Mars first? Will it be NASA or will it be SpaceX? And here's the announcement that came out recently that Jim Bridenstine, the NASA administrator, has said that NASA will be on Mars by 2035. Of course, von Braun once thought NASA would be on Mars by the 1980s. But Bridenstine does have a plan laid out for how to get to Mars by such a time frame. However, Buzz Aldrin, who was the second man to walk on the moon from the very first mission to the moon surface, Apollo 11, has suggested that maybe by 2040, NASA could go to Phobos as a stepping stone to get into Mars. Obviously, he's not so optimistic as Jim Bridenstine. That said, SpaceX, on the other hand, plans to have not flags and footprints on Mars by 2035. They plan to be sending colonists to Mars by 2024, the same date that NASA's planning to land flags and footprints on the moon. In fact, SpaceX is planning to start sending cargo ships to Mars by 2022 to start preparing Mars for those colonists to arrive, the first people to land on Mars, according to the plan set forth by SpaceX. So, who's going to get there first? So, in all fairness, NASA is looking to develop the moon before they go to Mars, and the moon has its own merits. And also in the works is Jeff Bezos with Blue Origins, who is actually just planning to bypass all that and go to the asteroids. But he also plans to go to the moon, support NASA's efforts, and doesn't seem, as far as we can see, to be moving near as fast as SpaceX. In fact, SpaceX has been flying orbital vehicles, and Blue Origin is yet to get there. However, Blue Origin has some plans, works the New Shepard, and there's rumors of a new Armstrong that may or may not have comparable capabilities with the SpaceX Starship. We shall see in time. Right now, we just don't know because Blue Origin does keep things quiet. All that said, so what are the relative merits of these different approaches, and who really has the best chances? Well, the moon can be a proving ground, as Jim Bridenstine pointed out, for how you're going to operate. It's nearby. You can work things out. So if you have problems, you're not a year transit out and back before you get them worked out. So you might say that SpaceX is proceeding at more risk, maybe. And but also you might say that NASA's being too cautious. I mean, there's different arguments with regards to going to Mars. Now, in regards to space development for commercial reasons, going to Mars is not necessarily a commercial venture in and of itself, but it could be. Going to the asteroids nearby seems to make a lot of sense from a business standpoint in terms of you could provide planetary defense services, and you could also, by mitigating impacts with Earth of asteroids, developing those technologies, and asteroid mining. That is a strong prospect. Also, you could essentially mine asteroids from the moon. And asteroids could be rich in platinum group metals and many other things. And helium-3 should be available from the surface of the moon and asteroids, which could enable electrostatic nuclear fusion, which could be a lot more energy friendly and efficient than a lot of other concepts. But people argue over that till the cows come home. That's not the purpose of this video. The purpose of this video is to say there are several different approaches for going into space right now and sending people to settle space that aren't on the same pathway. And I think that's a good thing. As I think I mentioned before, Mother Nature doesn't just have a tree that puts all its resources into one seed per year. If it did, well, there would be no trees. It puts out literally thousands. Well, we can't really put out thousands of different space approaches as yet, but having 3 on the table is quite interesting. And they're not mutually exclusive, not necessarily, depending on funding though. Now with NASA, funding has to be public. It's paid for by taxpayers. And so NASA has to garner support from the politicians around the country in order to enable their programs to proceed. And historically, that has meant spreading the programs around like peanut butter and jelly all over the country. real thin and getting a lot of different contractors from all over the country involved. And politically, that's the most expedient means to getting things passed through Congress, which has been quite difficult at times for NASA, so they've had to take steps like that. The downside is that puts us into using the same old contractors, the same old hardware, the same approaches. It's a more conservative approach, and it's not necessarily the fastest way to get anywhere, or maybe in the most efficient way, because you suddenly have tons of interfaces between all these different organizations. The interface control documents become sometimes the biggest cost of the whole program. However, it does mean a lot more eyeballs looking at whatever project you have, and a whole lot more people, and therefore it may have more reliability. It may catch a lot of things that might not get caught in other reviews, potentially. I'm just throwing out the different merits and demerits of these different approaches. Having different approaches, again, I will add, is a good thing. SpaceX, on the other hand, has gotten funding. It had seed money from Elon Musk that he took from PayPal, which was, exhausted to the company long ago. It has revenue from satellite launches, and of course, big contracts with NASA to do things like commercial cargo and now commercial crew to the International Space Station. And all these things do help the bottom line and provide a little corporate profit and R&D money, R&D that they can provide and plow into other things such as Starship. Now, that said, Elon plans to use Starship to launch his Starlink, and he's also going to use his Falcon 9 to launch Starlink. And Starlink may be the key, the link to paying for Elon Musk's grand adventures of going to Mars. And so if he has all his funding in one place, he's doing all his development in one place, he's not spreading everything around, everything's in-house, his costs are much lower, his processes are far more efficient, he may not have as many eyeballs on it. That may be the downside, but it seems that he is willing to take some hits, take some losses, and get back up and fly again, something that the governmental programs are loath to do because the political pressures of having failures can be catastrophic to a program when it's publicly funded. But Elon may be immune to that to a degree. So we'll have to see if Elon can survive the Hindenburg effect, as I've mentioned in a previous video. I hope he can, because I have stated before, Allison's laws of rockets are, rockets go boom, rockets have always gone boom, and rockets always will go boom. And SpaceX has boomed quite a few and had some explosions on landing and keeps going. Something the size of Starship with a few hundred passengers on board might be a bit more problematic, but if he is willing to keep pumping the money in and people are willing to keep flying, it's coming out of his own pocket. He just may be immune to that effect, and once things get going, it may keep going. Therefore, it might still work. I do expect, because there's so much technology and new approaches being developed at once, there's a lot of risk with a new vehicle like Starship. However, it's also bringing potentially a lot of opportunity. We're talking about something that could potentially get people to Mars at a price roughly commensurate to how colonists once came to America, in that it would be equivalent to your life savings, buying a big house. There are people, and enough people, that actually could afford it if he's able to do with his Starship program what he plans to do. If he's able to meet his objectives, even halfway, it will be such a game changer that, in a sense, it could be a business venture, because people will pay to go to Mars, to go to this alternate planet. That is, providing that we can find a way for people to live there safely. 1/3 gravity is a whole new thing. How will people live there? The transit to Mars, the radiation environment, the fact you got to land on a planet with initially no crew to get you off the spacecraft. There's a lot of problems to be solved in going to Mars. The soil's not even friendly. The soil's going to try to kill you because it's full of peroxides. It's full of blachloride, excuse me. And it's a challenging environment, but challenges can be met with good engineering. And Elon appears to be dedicated to applying that good engineering. And a lot of people around the country, you know, we have like 2 different societies in the United States that are dedicated solely to Mars development. And we have several pro-space groups and volunteers out there thinking through this stuff. We have paid people through various space agencies and companies, and of course, Elon's people. So I am optimistic that in time we will meet these challenges. And I hope we can do it in enough time that we won't have catastrophes in our first missions to Mars. But, you know, hey, that happened to America. We lost Jamestown. Half of the settlers that went to Plymouth the first winter were lost. Excuse me. We lost most of the people that went to Jamestown. The first colony that came to America was the colony of Roanoke. It completely was lost. That's what I meant to say other than Jamestown. But Jamestown is a good example that most of the people that went to Jamestown died. Not half like Plymouth, most of them. But then we find today that there was some political intrigue involved in that. It appears there was some poisoning, in addition to the fact that the environment was incredibly tough, and they picked a bad spot to swamp to start the first settlement, Jamestown. But hey, Jamestown was first, and it did survive, and so did Plymouth. But all the way across the West, settlers had a very high prospect of not making it. Death Valley wasn't named Death Valley because it was nice and rosy. So these names were due. I had a Dutch man who was quite a sailor, who told me in historic days that the Dutch who went to sea figured they only had a 50% chance of making it back home after their voyages. So the mortality rates were very high. I don't know if it was actually 50%, but that's what he told me. And he was at one time the European Space Agency rep to the Marshall Space Flight Center, working Space Lab. His name is Jan Byfoot. He was also an early officer in HAL 5, that's the Alabama L5 Society, of which I was founding president and returned as president again of recent. So there you have it. You have the approach of, you know, what the quiet approach is of Mr. Jeff Bezos with Blue Origins to go out and, well, he's planning to go to the moon first and you know, try to get a little things going to support NASA. But he's really planning mostly to go to the asteroids and develop free-floating, spinning O'Neill artificial gravity type space habitats, which is my favorite alternative, by the way. And I will do some videos on those type habitats. That is my favorite alternative by far, for many reasons. And I'll go into it. And actually, he well elucidated that concept in his talk about his lander when he did his lander debut, moon lander. I'm talking about, again, Jeff Bezos. And then we have NASA. NASA's Dan Brandenstein, who says, hey, we're going to Mars in 2035. And which Buzz Aldrin thinks is a little too optimistic. But of course, the main plan of NASA is to go to the moon and do lunar development, which has its own merits. And now you have Musk, who's wanting to go to Mars by 2024. So it just may happen that when we put flags and footprints on the Mars, the guys planting the flags and footprints may be looking at a well-developed human settlement. So, yeah, man, the word colonization is probably a bad term to use because we're really talking about settlements. We're talking about going to places where there are no natives, hopefully no one or nothing to take advantage of or subdue. This happened in the Americas, where advanced cultures overcame less advanced, and I mean advanced by having certain technological attributes. There were other attributes that these other cultures had, which had their own niche that just didn't survive in the competitive scheme of things in terms of industrial, societal type evolution that Western society has as its main operating factors today. All that said, these cultures have their own merits in many ways. I do have an high interest in herbal medicines and things like that, and I think those will be important once we develop space, because in a space habitat where you have to recycle everything, you don't need a lot of the current medicinals in your life support system when you actually can have natural items that you can actually grow anywhere. Just take some seeds. You don't need a pharmaceutical plant, so it's more efficient to produce herbals. And many of these herbals are as effective, if not more effective, than many of these pharmaceutical medicinals. There may be some exceptions where you will still want some pharmaceutical medicinals, but that will come at a price where the logistics chain is so far. And the cost of putting up a plant can be interesting. Although 3D printing and other technologies will certainly, hopefully, be of aid in this process. And there are notions of Santa Claus machines and other things that, I could talk about later. So all that said, this is an interesting time we live in, that truly now space development seems to be on the fast track. A lot of possibilities are before us. There is no, it's got to be this, that, or the other. It appears that we have 3 independent routes coming out of the United States alone, and Bezos and Musk and NASA. And they will be hopefully mutually reinforcing each other and supported by other international elements like the European Space Agency, NASA from Japan, and who knows who else will be working with us, maybe Cosmos, even though we've been having tensions between us and Russia. Hey, we're all together on ISS. Will China become a part of this? Or, of course, India and China and Russia have their own thrust, and other space agencies may arise elsewhere. The Israelis just tried to land on the moon recently. So, and I said try, they made a good effort of it. It's not an easy thing to do. So we're going to see a lot of possibilities here in the future, a lot of new developments coming out, different countries and different agencies pushing to develop and settle space. So it's an exciting time we live in. And so I'd like to hear comments below. Please tell me what you think, and who's going to get to the moon first. I mean, even Musk has hinted that he might land on the moon before NASA. Who's going to get to Mars first? Which approach do you think is best? Do you favor the approach by Musk, by Bezos, or Bridenstine? Who do you think has the best answers? How's it going to go down? There are merits and demerits to all these. You can feel free to debate them below. Don't challenge me on these because I'm not taking sides here. I'm just laying out what I'm talking about here and just different things because they're all possibilities. They're all interesting, and I'm excited that there are these different approaches taking place. We've always thought, well, it's got to be this, or it's got to be that, or it's got to be the other, because we assume public funding for everything. But we don't have to assume that anymore. That may not be the answer. Should some of it be public funded? Oh, yeah. I believe that really and truly the government has a job, the charge of doing things that private companies can't afford to do, and being the cutting edge of the sphere, ever-growing sphere, a bubble, expanding bubble of exploration. I laid this out in a debate we had called the Great Space Debate in the Space Review. And it was at the ISDC in Oklahoma many years ago. And I laid out this discussion of how this growing bubble should be supported by private enterprise, servicing it as it expands. Of course, some private enterprise is choosing to push beyond the bubble, as in SpaceX. And so I think that's exciting. SpaceX has their Starship, which I'm saying this is kind of a rough analog because I can't afford the expensive models right now. But hey, I'm not Scott Manley. But that's it. Hey, I love his channel. Do by all chances, all means, watch Scott Manley too, because he has a lot of good information in his channel. There's a lot of research for his topics. But the one thing I do on my channel sometimes is I have a little fun with my topics. Here's my little analog to the Super Heavy, the Starship, and prove that I think we might have some chance of reusability. I love to watch it. Hey, I'm the only channel on YouTube launching Starships or Starship analogs. So you got to have a little fun. I'm not going to do this on every video, but hey, it's fun. And there's the reusable aspect. So come on, guys, lighten up, have some fun, leave your comments below, and check out my links below, support this channel. Check out my sister channel, Green Greg's, because we are going to need to grow food in space, and you're going to need life support systems, and that's really where Green Greg's is going. So, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much for watching.